Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a book that's practically a legend in the world of human interaction, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
A classic for sure. And it's fascinating how relevant it remains, even though it was first published way back in 1936.
Almost a century later, and Dale Carnegie's insight still feels surprisingly fresh, like he cracked some secret code of human connection. But he didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air, right?
Not at all. This book was a labor of love over 15 years in the making. It all started with Carnegie jotting down ideas on index cards, testing them out in his courses, seeing what resonated with people, what actually worked.
So real-world testing, not just theory.
Absolutely. He was constantly refining his approach, incorporating feedback from everyday folks, all the way up to captains of industry. He wanted to understand what made people tick, what made them connect, and how to build those strong, lasting relationships.
Like a charisma scientist experimenting and analyzing what actually clicked.
Exactly. And this wasn't just some side hustle for him. Back then, the University of Chicago and the YMCA conducted this massive survey asking folks what they wanted to learn.
What do they discover?
Turns out, people were practically begging for a guidebook on human relations. They craved practical knowledge about understanding each other, building rapport, navigating those tricky waters of influence. And that's the void Carnegie stepped in to fill.
Okay, so he tapped into this universal need to connect. But the title, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I have to say, it does sound a bit calculated, don't you think?
I can see where you're coming from.
Like we're strategizing to win a game rather than building genuine relationships.
That's a fair point. But that's where Carnegie's brilliance really shines through. He understood that influence, at its core, isn't about manipulation or forcing your agenda on others. It's about understanding what drives people, what they desire, and finding those win-win situations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So where does this journey into the human psyche begin?
Carnegie kicks things off with a principle that's both profound and incredibly practical. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
Ooh, now that's a tough one, right? Especially when things go sideways, our gut instinct is to point fingers, find someone to blame.
Exactly. And he illustrates this with a chilling story about Two Gun Crowley, a notorious gangster. Even when he was literally facing the electric chair, Crowley refused to take responsibility for his actions.
Oh, wow.
Claimed he was always just defending himself.
Talk about an extreme case of ego defense mechanism. But it makes you think, don't we all do that to some extent? We rationalize our missteps, shift the blame to protect our own egos.
Absolutely. And it's not just a gangster mentality either. Think about the Teapot Dome scandal, the massive political earthquake back in the 1920s. Albert Fall, this high-ranking government official, was caught red-handed taking bribes.
It was huge news.
But even with overwhelming evidence stacked against him, he just kept deflecting, pointing fingers at everyone else. Refused to accept any blame.
So how do we break free from this blame game? If we're hardwired to protect ourselves, how do we create space for honesty, for productive conversations when things go wrong?
Well, that's where Carnegie throws in this brilliant contrast, a true master of restraint, Abraham Lincoln. Even Lincoln, known for his composure, his diplomacy, in a moment of frustration, penned a scathing letter to General Meade during the thick of the Civil War.
Oh, I can only imagine what a Lincoln scolding would look like.
Right. But here's the thing, he never sent the letter. Lincoln realized that while dishing out criticism might feel satisfying in the moment, it rarely leads to positive change. Instead, it often breeds resentment, damages relationships.
He chose to be strategic, not reactive. But holding back, especially when you've got that urge to let someone have it, that takes serious self-control.
It does. But think how many arguments, hurt feelings, damaged relationships could be avoided if we all practiced a little Lincolnian restraint. Sometimes, choosing to understand rather than condemn, that's the most powerful path to influence.
Okay, wow, so much to unpack there. Holding back on criticism, especially when it feels justified, that's a real art. But it makes me wonder, if we're not focusing on what people are doing wrong, where do we go from there? How do we pivot from critique to connection?
That's where Carnegie's next principle comes into play, and it's a game changer for sure. Become genuinely interested in other people.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds almost too simple, but I have a feeling there's more to it than just asking people about their hobbies or their weekend plans.
You're spot on. It's about tapping into something much deeper, a fundamental human need. See, Carnegie understood that we all crave to be seen, heard, truly understood. He illustrates this with a very relatable story called Father Forgets.
I think I remember this one. It's about a dad who's so busy correcting his son's every move that he misses out on the chance to connect with him on a deeper level.
Exactly. He's so caught up in what his son is doing wrong that he forgets to appreciate who his son is.
It's a tough but important lesson for any parent, and honestly, it resonates beyond just parenting. We all want to feel valued for who we are, not just for what we can do or achieve.
Absolutely. And Carnegie argued that one of the simplest yet most powerful ways to show their appreciation is through genuine focused attention. Listening attentively when someone speaks, encouraging them to share their passions, their experiences, their stories, that's where true connection begins.
So it's less about trying to impress others with our own accomplishments and more about shining the spotlight on them, letting them take center stage.
Precisely. He tells this great anecdote about how he once charmed a botanist at a dinner party, and get this, he barely said a word.
No way. How do you pull that off?
The botanist was completely engrossed in his own field, so Carnegie simply listened intently, asked engaging questions, and encouraged him to talk about his passion for plants.
So the botanist walked away thinking Carnegie was this brilliant conversationalist, but really he was just a master of making others feel important.
Exactly. And the best part is, this principle transcends social circles or professions. Even someone like Theodore Roosevelt, a larger-than-life figure known for his accomplishments, understood the power of this.
Really, Teddy Roosevelt, this speak softly but carry a big stick guy.
The one and only. He made it a point to remember the names of everyone he encountered, even his servants. He'd greet them personally, showing a genuine interest in their lives.
Wow, it's like those small gestures of acknowledging someone's individuality, their humanity, can go such a long way in building rapport.
They do. It's about making people feel seen, valued, not just like another face in the crowd. Carnegie found that those who consistently applied this principle, whether it was remembering a birthday, asking thoughtful questions, or just truly listening without interruption, they were the ones who built the most meaningful, the most influential relationships.
Okay, I'm convinced. It makes sense. But how do we go beyond just building rapport? How do we transition from making someone feel heard to actually inspiring them to take action? That's got to take more than just active listening, right?
It does. And that's where we get to another one of Carnegie's core principles, and it's a powerful one. Arouse in the other person an eager want.
Arouse an eager want. That sounds a little bit, I don't know, manipulative when you put it like that. Like we're trying to exploit someone's desires to get what we want.
I hear you. It does sound a bit intense on the surface. But what Carnegie was getting at is actually quite simple and ethical. He understood that people are far more likely to embrace an idea, to say yes to a request, if it aligns with their own desires, goals, and values.
So it's less about imposing our agenda and more about finding that sweet spot where our goals and their aspirations intersect.
Exactly. He gives this example of a dad trying to get his son excited about starting kindergarten. Instead of lecturing him about the importance of education, this dad gets creative.
Oh, I love when parents get creative. What'd he do?
He starts finger painting with his wife, talking about all the fun things his son will do in kindergarten, the friends he'll make, the games they'll play, the creative projects they'll tackle.
So smart. He tapped into his son's natural desire for fun and play.
And it worked like a charm. Pretty soon, the son is practically begging to go to kindergarten. He turned a potential power struggle into a win-win.
Brilliant. So how do we apply that in a more, shall we say, grown-up context?
It's the same principle. It's about understanding what motivates people, what makes them tick. And that's where that first principle of genuine interest comes back into play.
It's all connected.
It is. The more we listen, observe, ask thoughtful questions, the better we understand someone's motivations, their values, their dreams. And once we understand those, we can start framing our requests, our ideas, even our disagreements in a way that resonates with what they already care about.
So it's almost like becoming a detective of human motivation. We have to look for clues in their words, their actions, their passions.
Precisely. And Carnegie tells this fascinating story about how he used this very principle to negotiate a much more favorable lease for his lecture hall. The hotel wanted to triple his rent.
Oof, that's rough. Landlords, right? What did he do?
Well, instead of getting angry or pleading with them, he appealed to their business interests. He reminded them how his lectures brought in this well-heeled clientele, generated a positive buzz for the hotel, and he even took the time to write it all out.
He came prepared.
He did. He presented the hotel with this clear, concise list of advantages and disadvantages, not just for him, but for them.
He made it about their needs, not just his own. So what happened? Did they cave?
It works like a charm. They ended up negotiating a much smaller increase because he was able to demonstrate how it was a win-win.
Wow, that's brilliant. I'm starting to see how this principle applies to so many different situations, from parenting to business negotiations. Do you have another example of this arousing and eager want playing out in, say, a sales context?
Absolutely. Carnegie tells this story about a salesman who had been trying for years to land this big account with a hotel steward. Every week, he'd go in, pitch his bread, and get absolutely nowhere.
Ugh, I can feel the sting of rejection just hearing that. Sounds like my kind of nightmare.
Right. But then, one day, he stumbled upon the secret. Instead of launching into his usual bread-centric sales pitch, he took a moment to engage the steward in conversation. It was casual chit-chat. And he discovered the steward was passionate about, wait for it, orchids.
Orchids, of all things.
Right. Turns out, the salesman also happened to be an orchid enthusiast, so he completely shifted gears. Instead of talking about bread, they spent the entire visit geeking out over their shared love of orchids.
No way. He completely changed the game from bread to botany, and what happened? Did the steward see the light and place a massive bread order?
A few days later, that steward placed a huge order. That simple shift from talking at someone to connecting with their interests completely transformed the dynamic and ultimately led to a successful outcome.
That's incredible. It just goes to show how important it is to find that common ground, that shared passion, even if it seems completely unrelated to the task at hand.
Exactly. And Henry Ford, a man who knew a thing or two about influence, he summed it up perfectly when he said, if there's any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, I'm sold. But seeing things from their side of the fence, not just our own, I have to admit, that's easier said than done, right? How do we go beyond just saying we care about someone's perspective to actually stepping into their shoes and truly seeing the world through their eyes? It really is a practice, isn't it? To kind of step outside of our own heads, our own agendas, and really try to see things from that other vantage point. It's so easy to get caught up in what we want, what we're trying to get across.
Absolutely. We've all been there. And that's why Carnegie stresses the importance of sincerity in all of this. It's not about putting on an act, pretending to care about something when you don't. These principles, they only work when we're truly present, genuinely invested in understanding that other person.
Right. It's not just about the words themselves, it's the energy behind them. It's about approaching every interaction with a spirit of empathy.
Exactly. And he drives this point home with this great comparison between two letters.
Well,
One was from an advertising agency. They were trying to get on this radio station's preferred list,
yeah.
to give them a competitive edge.
Okay. Yeah.
But their letter, it was all about their needs. We want our accounts. Just a laundry list of demands, really.
Oh, yeah, I can see that going south quickly. It's like they forgot they were talking to actual human beings.
It's painful, right? And unsurprisingly, that letter went straight into the reject pile. But then there was Barbara Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
She was applying for a job at a bank.
Okay.
And instead of just listing out her qualifications or experience, she focused on what she could do for them.
Oh, interesting. So she flipped the script. Instead of here's why you should hire me, it was more like here's how I can help you achieve your goals.
Exactly. She took the time to understand the bank's needs, and then she positioned herself as a valuable asset.
Smart.
And guess what? 11 out of 12 banks invited her for an interview.
Wow, that's impressive. It's a powerful reminder that focusing on the other person's needs, it's not about being selfless, it's about being strategic.
Exactly. And, sometimes it takes a real conscious effort to shift our perspective like that,
Yeah.
especially when we feel strongly about something.
Oh, for sure.
Carnegie tells this great story about a salesman, C.M. Naffel, who had spent years trying to land this contract with this chain store company.
Okay.
But here's the thing, he hated chain stores. He thought they were putting small businesses under, and he would go on these rants about it.
I can already see where this is going. Not exactly the best strategy to win over a potential client.
Not at all. But then Carnegie challenged him to try something radical. He told him to go to this guy, the chain store executive, the very person he despised, and ask for his help.
Wait, he asked his nemesis for advice? That's a bold move.
It was. But you know what? The executive, he was totally caught off guard, and he ended up spending hours with Naffel, sharing his insights, his perspective on the chain store business. That simple act of humility, of acknowledging the other person's expertise, it completely transformed their relationship.
It wasn't about pretending to agree with everything the executive said. It was about demonstrating a willingness to listen, to learn, to see things from that other angle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the result, the executive, he was so impressed by Naffel's sincerity, his newfound understanding, that he ended up giving him a huge order.
Wow. It just goes to show you sometimes the quickest way to break down those walls to build a bridge is to approach each other with genuine curiosity.
It's true. And that's what's so powerful about Carnegie's work. It taps into these core human desires, the need to connect, to feel valued, to achieve something meaningful together.
We've covered so much ground today. As we wrap up our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Carnegie himself said that while the principles in his book might seem simple on the surface, they do require effort. It takes practice, a conscious decision to put them into action, to really master them. So, my challenge for our listeners today is this. Pick one principle, just one, that particularly resonates with you, and commit to trying it out this week. Make it a personal experiment.
I love that. See how it impacts your interactions, your relationships, even the way you approach challenges in your own life.
Exactly. Carnegie believed that we all have this incredible capacity to create more positive, more fulfilling lives, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. And it all starts with this willingness to connect, to understand, to build those bridges of genuine, lasting relationships.
It's such a powerful message, a blueprint for building a better world one interaction at a time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep those connections strong and those conversations flowing.